What if I told you that by learning this one jazz standard, you could unlock 99% of jazz harmony? So today, we're looking at the jazz standard, There Will Never Be Another You. If you master this tune, then you have like a cheat sheet for understanding almost all jazz chord progressions. So we're going to break this down into 3 different skill levels. For the beginner version, we're going to be focusing on the melody. The intermediate version, we're going to start to look at these chord progressions and how this tune is put together and what you can play over it. And for the advanced version, there's some more advanced improvisation techniques that you can try out. So we'll start with this beginner version and we're going to learn how to vary this melody. If you were to look up this tune, say in a real book, you'll see it looks very plain. It's mostly just quarter notes and half notes. But when you hear this tune being played, it's never performed like that, and that's true with so many jazz standards. And the first thing to try is to vary the melody's rhythm. And you can do this in quite an intuitive way. If you put your saxophone down and try singing the first couple of phrases and have an experiment with pulling around the rhythm, so making some notes a bit longer, some notes a bit quicker, you'll naturally find when you sing it, it comes out in a much more musical way than if you go straight to your sax. Then once you've sung a couple of phrases, try playing what you were just singing. And this really helps to connect your musical imagination to the instrument. You can also add in things like grace notes, which is a great way to decorate the melody. You normally go slightly below the target note and quickly move on to it. And another more advanced technique is to fill in some of the gaps. You can lead into the next phrases, you can do something called answer phrases, and you can take inspiration from those and start to try and do your own variations. Okay, so moving up to the intermediate level, it's time for a bit of harmonic analysis, but I'll keep it nice and straightforward. What we've got up here is an example intermediate solo for alto sax. That helps us when we're looking at the chords as well because it puts us into C major, so a nice easy key to look through. So as I said, we're in C major, and so we're starting off on chord 1 for these first 2 measures. Now in terms of the example solo, you can see the first 5 notes. They are just going up a C major 7 arpeggio. We're just starting on the 7th, 7, and then 1, 3, 5, 7. So just the chord tones. And then we just have some notes from the C major scale. And you can even think of those as being part of our C major pentatonic scale. Now bars 3, 4 and 5, this is our first real common chord progression. Now this is known as a minor 2-5-1, and it's also known as a minor 2-5-1 to the relative minor. What that means is we're in the key of C major. The relative minor is the chord 6. So if we go up these chords, the 6th chord, A minor, this is like the flip side of the major. Every major key also has a relative minor key. And so it's really common to move between these 2 different keys. So we start in C major for the first 2 measures. And then we have this 2-5-1 to A minor. So we're thinking of that B half diminished as 2, but it's the 2 of A minor. Then we have the E7, and you can hear that really pulls us to the A minor and it feels resolved. Now in terms of what you can play over this, in this example line here, what I'm thinking here is A harmonic minor, and I'm walking down to land on this G sharp. Now the G sharp is the 3rd of this E7 chord. So we've got our E in the bass, and you can hear how that G sharp fits really nicely. It's one of our key chord tones. The chord tones of E7 are E, G sharp, B and D. And you'll see that 3rds are a really common landing place as a chord changes. And so on this E7 chord, I'm just going up 3-5-1, up the E7 chord tones. and then we've got 7/5 coming down, and this is wrapping around to land on another third. We're now landing on C, which is the third of A minor. You can hear how that works really well. Now for the rest of these two measures, I'm basically filling in with an A minor pentatonic scale. Before we walk down to another third, we're now going to a new chord progression. This is a 2-5-1, and it's a major 2-5-1 this time because we're landing on F major, and we've got G minor 7, C7, F major 7. Now we can call this a major 2-5-1 in the key of F, but also if we relate this back to the overall key of C major, we can think of this as a 2-5-1 moving us to chord 4. So F major we think of as chord 4, and that again is another really common chord progression. You can see how we're changing key with these B flats, and that's giving us this slightly darker sound relative to C major. And again for this intermediate solo, I'm mostly thinking in chord tones and scale tones. So I'm thinking I'm in the key of F major, and I'm on a G minor 7 chord here. The notes for G minor 7, G, B flat, D and F. And so in that bar, I'm literally just going, climbing up like a little pattern, 3-1, 5-3, 7-5, and that leads us to the third of our C7, 3-4-5-1. Before stepping down, this is really common, we've got the 7th of C7, steps down nicely again to the third of F major 7, which sounds like this. So that's our second chord progression. We've had moving to the relative minor with a minor 2-5-1, and then moving to chord 4 with a 2-5-1. All right, next up, we've got another really common chord progression, especially after chord 4. We're going to be moving back to chord 1, but we're not doing it via a typical, say, 2-5-1 of D minor 7, G7. Instead, you can see we've got F minor, and you can see we've got F minor 6, B flat 7, and then C major 7. And this is known in the jazz world as the backdoor 2-5-1, and it's very commonly played after you've played your 4 major chord. So we have our F major 7, and then we make it darker with the minor, often minor 6 or minor major 7, B flat 7, and then that rises up to the C major 7. And again on here I'm targeting the third, so A flat is the third of F minor, and then here I'm moving to the E, which is again is the third of the C major 7. Now coming up next we have another fundamental chord sequence, which is this chord here, which is held for 2 bars, 2 measures. This is known as the chord 2 secondary dominant. Normally our 2 chord, you can see it's coming up later on, is a minor chord, and that's because in the key of C major, there's our C major chord. If we go up to the second and build a chord, we end up with D minor 7. But what we have here is D7, a brighter sound, because we've got F sharp. So it's a major chord with that dominant 7th. And so I like to think of it in terms of shades of light and dark. We're starting in our home key C major. We're then going into the minor world of A minor. We then get darker because we've got our first flat, 1 flat introduced as we move into F major. Then we get even darker with F minor before returning us back home to C major. We're staying in this C major A minor world for a couple of measures, and then we brighten up into D7. Now this D7 is known as the secondary dominant because G7 is a dominant chord. Dominant is just a fancy way of saying chord 5. So if we're in C major, G is the 5th note of C major, and when you build a chord, you get G7. So that's our dominant chord. Now if we go 5 notes up in G, we end on a D. Now if we make that a dominant 7th, we get the secondary dominant, or the dominant of the dominant. So this D7 wants to fall to G7, which then falls to C major 7. Now on this secondary dominant, I'm keeping it simple. There are some more advanced things you can do, which we'll talk about in the advanced solo, but for this intermediate solo, again, it's mostly chord tones. This is all chord tones apart from this note, the E, and I suppose you can think of that as a 9th. But to keep it simple, we've got 1, 3, 5, 7, Those are our basic chord tones. And the line is just going 3, 1, 1, 5, and then we've got 7, 1, 2, 1. So we've got... Again, notice how we're starting on the third. So the third of D7, before moving to a similar line, but all we're doing is flattening the F sharp back to F natural, and that takes us from this dominant sound to a minor sound. And again, I'm targeting the third as we hit this G7 chord. Now this is the end of the first half. You'll see what happens in this second half is we have these same harmonic progressions again. It changes a bit at the end, but we start on chord 1. We have our minor 2-5 to the relative minor of A minor. We have our major 2-5 to chord 4. Then we have our backdoor chord progression taking us back to chord 1, and then it changes a little bit here. Now what we've got here, this is known as a short 2-5. Short just means we've put it into a one measure instead of one measure of each chord. It could be known as like a long 2-5. Now this is a short minor 2-5 because we have F sharp half diminished. Whenever you see that chord symbol of the circle with the line through it, it means half diminished. You can also think of it as a minor 7 chord, so F sharp minor 7 would be this, and then you flatten the 5th, comes down to there. So F sharp minor 7 and B7, you would expect it to go to E minor. That would be a short minor 2-5-1. This is just a short minor 2-5, and it changes and comes back to C major. Now if I show you E minor, we've got these notes. E minor 7 would be E, G, B, D. Now if I change this to C major 7, you can see 3 of these notes are in common. And in fact, if I played a C major 7 with a 9th on it, C major 9, you can see we've got that E minor 7 chord right inside of it. So it's a really common substitution to have the chord 1 instead of chord 3, or vice versa. Now this final line, we've got things known as turnarounds. And to start off with, you could take this first half. If we look at these chords, we've got C major 7, so chord 1, F7, this is known as chord 4, but it's not like our chord 4 we had up here, which was an F major 7. This is chord 4 dominant 7th. So it's 1, and you can hear it's got that bluesier sound because we've got that E flat to make it an F dominant 7th chord. So this is known as 1, 4 dominant 7th, and then we have chord 3, 6 dominant 7th, and that is a really common turnaround. It's a way to get to landing on chord 2, and you'll see this all the time in standards. People will call it just a 1, 4, 3, 6. We're literally just spelling out the root notes of each of those chords. And we're finishing here with what's known as, again, it's a short 2-5-1. Again, it's short because it's all, this 2 and 5 is in one measure. So chord 2, 5 and 1. Bringing us back home. Now inside this, you could also take out this middle section here. If you took just those chords on their own, this is another really famous chord progression. It's also another kind of turnaround. It's a 3-6-2-5. So we have chord 3, chord 6 with dominant 7th, chord 2 and chord 5 before coming back to the 1. And the most common place you'll find these faster chord progressions in this kind of turnaround style is at the ends of sections. So usually at the end of an A section to get us back to the A section again, or if it's like, say, the second A section moving into a B section, they might have a little turnaround setting us up into a key change. And at the ends of tunes as well, it kind of revs up the harmonic rhythm. It gets us moving around some faster chords before flinging us back to the beginning of the chord sequence. Now again, in terms of this intermediate solo, all I'm using are chord tones. So if you know your 1, 3, 5, 7 for each of these chords, you can then start to try and find smooth pathways linking through. What I was thinking here is we've got this third here, which then flattens to this E flat. E flat is the 7th of our F7. Then that D is prominent here, which is again just a semitone lower, and again another semitone lower. We're just slightly anticipating that's the 3rd of A7. And this is also commonly known as a guide tone line. So if we start with this E on the C major 7 chord, that's flattens to F7, flattens again to D on the E minor 7, and then the C sharp. And so when I play this line, you'll hear the guide tones going through. And to finish off, again, mostly thinking chord tones. This is pure chord tones here. And here we've got a very common little jazz piece of language. We're going 3, 4, 5, 7 on that D minor 7 chord. And that gets us to our third of G7 really easily. And again, you can see we've got the third of G7 here, the third of C major 7 here, and the third of D minor 7 there. That's a great exercise for you intermediate improvisers out there, is see if you can connect through landing on the thirds of each of the chords. All right, so that is the harmonic analysis. You'll find these chord progressions in nearly all jazz standards. You'll see at least one of these, if not multiple of them. Of course, they may be in different keys, but they'll have the same harmonic function. All right, so let's give this intermediate solo a try. You'll see there's alto saxes along the top and tenor saxes along the bottom. Alright, so moving on to this advanced solo. Remember, premium members, you can download the intermediate and advanced versions with the backing tracks and performance tracks. I've also put in an extended backing track in there as well, so you can do a few extra choruses where you can add the tune at the beginning and the end. Now, of course, it's exactly the same chord sequence, but we're putting some slightly more advanced ideas in here. The first one is on this B half diminished chord. You'll see we've got this unusual note here of a C sharp. Now that's coming from a D melodic minor, and we're thinking jazz melodic minor, so same on the way up and down, which are these notes. And that C sharp has a really interesting sound to it. You can see it has this kind of floaty sound. And so you can use that sound on the B half diminished. On this E7 flat 9, I'm thinking of the altered scale, which is basically our F melodic minor scale. And we've got this sound of... It's a very tense sound, which then resolves to our A minor 7. For the A minor 7, it's mostly chord tones. I'm emphasizing the 6th degree here, which gives it a bit more of a floaty kind of sound. That's the only slightly more unusual thing, but no crazy scales. For our major 251 to chord 4, what we've got going on here, this is like a big enclosure. So what I'm really thinking as I'm playing this is I'm thinking about really landing on the B flat on this C7, which is the 7th of C7. And to approach into this B flat, we're starting 2 notes below. So on this A flat, so we're going 2 notes below it, and then we go 2 notes above it and come down. And so when you play that fast, and this is a very common kind of bebop sound. And so this whole line goes like this. We're just coming up the chord tones really, 2, 3, 5, 7, and then this enclosure before we land on that C7. For the C7 chord, it's mostly the notes of the C altered scale, but there's also a chromatic passing note here. So to get from the B flat to the A flat, we're adding in this A natural in between. Now this works well because, again, the fundamentals of aiming for chord tones, it hasn't changed. So I'm aiming to land on this A, the 3rd of F major 7. So I can have this very tense sound coming down, and all that tension gets released as we land on the A. You'll see there's more targeting of the thirds here, so A flat on this F minor chord. What I'm thinking here is keeping a similar shape, so for the F major 7, And then for the F minor, I'm only changing that A to an A flat. Nothing particularly unusual for the C major and A minor. Now for this dominant seventh, we've got some chromatic passing notes. We've also got this note here. Now this is the key one. What you can often do on a secondary dominant chord is think of it as a sharp 11 chord. So that gives us this sound. We've got 1, 3, 5, 7. We add on the ninth, and then G sharp. That is coming from the scale of the A melodic minor scale, and this chord of D7 sharp 11 is inside our A melodic minor scale, and so you can use the A melodic minor scale to improvise with, and so that's where that sound comes from there, and it has a much more kind of floaty ethereal sound. For this 251 here, this is a really nice piece of language. It's basically using these guide tone lines again. What I'm doing here is emphasizing a descending pattern of, we've got D to C sharp to C before eventually resolving onto this B here, and that bit of the line sounds like this. And then we go into more of an altered sound before resolving in measure 17, just back to the 5th degree, nice strong chord tone on that C major 7. Now after this fairly dense and quite complicated line, things kind of relax a little bit for this next line. There's nothing too crazy here. Now for this third line here, there's nothing too crazy in terms of notes at the beginning, but there is something interesting rhythmically. Each of these notes I'm putting a line above. All of these are on the and. They're all an offbeat. And that can be a cool thing to play around with when you're improvising. So if you've got the pulse like 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got like ba 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 ba, just going in between the beats. To finish off this line, this is a nice sound. What we're using here is an A major triad on top of a C7 chord. The chord tones you're hitting, C sharp is the flat 9 of C7, the 6th and the 3rd. And by playing a really strong, stable structure like a major triad, it creates an interesting tension. So if I play this line, you'll hear we've got the C7 at the bottom, and then we've got this. It's quite a tense sound, and that resolves to the F major. There's nothing particularly complicated on this line here. There's a little chromatic passing note going into this B natural there. For this last line, again, it's mostly chord tones, but this structure here is quite nice to play with. This goes all the way back to players like Lester Young, where they like to use an augmented triad, which basically means we've got a G7 chord, and if you take the 5th, so 1, 3, 5, you take that and raise it up, we have this augmented shape, and you can see it's saying G aug there on the chords, and so you can use that shape and it resolves nicely down to the 9th of the C major, like that. Alright, so let's have a go at playing this solo now. Of course, you can take these ideas and these techniques and use them as inspiration to make up your own lines and phrases as well. Alright, so here is this advanced solo. Now over at Online Sax Academy at the moment, we also have a 14-day free trial, which will allow you to try out all the courses and materials we have. So if you're interested in learning how to improvise, you can try that Learn to Improvise course, which steps you through from the very beginning all the way up to playing over jazz standards like this one. There's also the Sax Player's Toolkit course, which is all about phrasing and articulation and making your sax playing sound way more expressive. And general musicianship courses, things like the Mastering Rhythm course, the Ear Training and Practical Music Theory course. And these will give you a much deeper understanding of the music you're hearing and playing. Alright, that's it for this week, guys. I'll see you soon.